Everyone, what a lovely fall day today, right? And I see somebody has some trick-or-treat candy over there. I'm gonna catch that on my way out. Nothing like some good Halloween candy, I tell you. So welcome, everyone. I'm gonna call to order the Nashville MTA Board meeting. First on our agenda is roll call. Jessica Dobbin.
Present.
Mary Griffin.
Here.
Gail Carr-Williams, present. Janet Miller.
Present.
And I know Mr. Searcy is on his way. So first on our agenda is the approval of the September 22nd board minutes, if I could have a motion.
Can I make, sorry? Oh,
Sure.
Sorry. Yes, do we do the motion and then if there's an amendment?
Well, usually we do the motion first, but it's
Okay.
okay. You can give us an amendment, so which is fine.
Oh,
Go ahead.
my apologies, then I always forget the order of that. It's very
It's
minor.
okay.
It's very minor. It's on page 4, 8A, the paragraph beginning CEO Bland, literally minor. The word ultimately, if we can, it's just, typo nature, but if we can just make that minor amendment.
So page 4,
Yes, page 4, Roman numeral 8, A, paragraph beginning, CEO Bland thanked Metro Planning Director Lucy Kempf and her staff. Ultimately, I do actually read all of these every month.
so
And
ultimately just needs to be
that's it.
spelled
It's
correctly.
very minor.
We love having an attorney on the board. That's super helpful.
I'm feeling doubtful on that, but,
Three attorneys on the board.
But Monica does such a fantastic job that I know for posterity, she'll want that corrected.
Yeah.
She will want that corrected. So I will give it to you. I circled it and make certain that you have it, Monica. So with that change, we do have, Jessica, if you want to make your motion again, please,
I move to approve the minutes
with the change.
with the change.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Is there any further discussion, additions, deletions? With that all being said, all those in favor say aye.
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 We have minutes. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda are public comments. I don't have any notices of a of anyone wishing to make a public comment, but I'll ask, is there anyone here who wishes to make a public comment? Any requests for public comments? Hearing none, that closes that portion of our agenda today. Next on our agenda is the information-only items. As you can see, there are 3 different items for this portion. Staff is here. Should any board member have a question about those? And if not, I will ask again that you mindfully read and pay attention to those reports in your board packet. No questions for anyone? Not hearing any, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the consent agenda. We have no items for our consent agenda today. Therefore, we will move through our agenda. And what I like to do is change the agenda just a little bit today. And if I could take the new initiatives and community engagement committee before we do operations and finance, that would be great. So I will turn this over to my vice chair, Janet Miller.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Chair Williams. So we do not have any action items today, but we've got a presentation on grant funding. And we're super excited about it because there seem to be props and it looks like it might be like a play they're going to put on here for us. So, but Felix is going to lead our discussion, and I think we all look forward to learning more about how this complicated grant system works. So with that, I'll hand it to you, Felix.
Excellent. Good afternoon. Thank you. It's not used for planning to go first, so this is exciting.
Exciting. So exciting, isn't it?
When you're ready,
Don't abuse the
Felix.
privilege, Felix.
Your life must not be
We'll
very
see.
exciting, Felix.
Yeah, when you're ready, you're just ready.
That's right. Billy and I are going to tag team today and bring to you a presentation of our grant funding process. And this stemmed from a question from Mary Griffin a few months back where she was asking, how do we determine what funding we assign to projects and how we go about securing that funding? And I'm pretty sure when you asked that, you knew that the answer was not a straight answer. It was a complicated one, and that's why we're here with this item today. So, but hopefully the way we structured this presentation without getting into the weeds is going to give you a sense of what is our thought process as we go selecting those projects, looking for that funding, who the players are, the things that we have to be mindful of, and maybe close with some takeaways for you as a board to think about more and ponder about that process overall. So, and at least I know my personal goal as I go through these is going to be that maybe the next time you hear somebody saying, let's look for some funding, or use the word funding in a simplistic way, maybe you can quote The Princess Bride and say, you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. So hopefully that'll be a good learning from this experience. But we wanted to start with this word cloud that Steve graciously helped us to put together. But when you get to the word funding, there's a lot of things that you have to think about. And this just illustrates basically that even at the federal, the state, the local level, whatever level it is, there's, when you're looking at navigating the process for eligibility for transit funding, there's a lot of programs, there's a lot of players, there is a lot of terminology that we have to explore, be familiar with. And some of them we know very well, some we know a little bit, some we don't know very well. So it's a constant learning process in this experience. So the first question is, when you go into this, what are we trying to fund? So there's three main areas when you look at it. And you have your capital projects, you have your operational projects, and then you have that gray area that's kind of overlaps in between the two. But something to think about this is that there are components to different projects. So, there's nothing like a straight capital project. You may get some grants to build a facility, for example, but once you build that, you need to think about, so how are you going to maintain that? Is there a security component to it? How are you going to account for the cost of utilities, for example? Or you think of technology, same thing, licensing agreements. How do you develop the capacity internally and the expertise to keep that technology working properly for you? So when you go into these, you have to make account of those different components, and you have to plan ahead, because this is going to build into your overall cost for the project. In the long term, you have to account for all these different aspects of what you're trying to fund. With this slide, I want to make sure that you understand that the process for selecting projects and selecting the funding is very tightly and strategically linked to our planning process. So it's not something that we see the money and then we come up with a project, hey, let's go pursue that funding. So if you look at starting with Nashville Next, which is the comprehensive plan for Metro Nashville, adopted in 2015, and it laid out the policies. It had a transportation component that included transit corridors. So on the back end of that came in motion. So we utilized what came out of that Nashville Next process to build on recommendations for improving our system. You take the Metro Nashville Transportation Plan adopted in December 2020. It has those recommendations from Emotion, for example, transit centers, Better Bus, which is a byproduct of our Emotion process. So it's all linked and founded on that planning process. And you look at the Transit Asset Management Plan that Trey is going to speak more about later. That is the guide for our state of good repair projects. So everything has a process, and it's deeply rooted in how we're trying to stick to that plan. So now I'm going to turn it over to Billy, and she's got some interesting stuff, and talk more about the details on the planning process.
So you can't just pitch in a good idea to funders and expect to see the money flow in a week or two. We're government funded, and so it takes a lot of time to get that money. And it involves planning and working with different partners and following a structured process to secure funding for a project, whether it's capital or planning or operating. So I thought I'd use some props to give you an example of what kind of goes through my brain when we're trying to secure the money for what we want to do. We start off, you as a board and we as an organization adopted a strategic service plan back in 2016. And the ideas and the goals and the projects behind that service plan helped form or helped guide what's going into the long-range transportation plan that the Metropolitan Planning Organization is required to keep up with and strategize with investing of the funding for the region. So with that in motion plan, afterwards you've also got your rolling stock, your capital plan, what I call it's not rolling stock, your rolling capital plan. And your rolling capital plan has those detailed items that you adopted, what we want to do to implement and reach the service plan goals that we adopted back in 16. So you've got a project, and it starts off with you as a board and where we're going to go. And then in order to get the money for it, it's got to come over here to the Greater Nashville Regional Council and go through the Metropolitan Planning Organization planning process. It's got to be part of a 25-year plan or consistent with the plan for the region and the investment of the federal funds. They also responsible for putting together the 5-year plan known as the Transportation Improvement Plan. And those are the details behind the money. So they have these general large buckets of money, and each project for the region, all of the partners, the cities, the counties, the state partners, and the federal partners that are putting projects, making projects happen in this region, their project has to be in that TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program. That's Transportation Improvement Program also rolls up into the state, so that that will be adopted by the Transportation Research Board of the MPO, and then the state incorporates that into its transportation planning improvement plan. We use that to guide your capital plan and your in-motion plan, guide what we put in the capital improvement budget for Metro. So I've got my things mixed up. So you've got the state, and then you've got Metro, and they all kind of funnel, that middle column that you see on the slide, those plans help us get one step closer to getting the money. And sometimes a project, it's always got to be in the TIP. And so there's some similarities there, but there's also some nuances. The capital improvement plan is just Metro money. It doesn't take into account the federal dollars or the state dollars. And those three different levels have to kind of coincide or all meld together to get you where you want to go, is to get the money for the project. This capital improvement plan that Metro adopts every year, it's another guiding planning document that informs and then makes it available for the capital spending plan that Metro Council adopts every year to do capital projects. And then once those funds are in that final column, where they're in the capital spending plan, or they're in the TIP, or they're in capital improvement, I'm going to get to it, but there's so many different layers. It's not as simple as where you see these columns are. And so I wanted to bring in the bus, and so, okay, I've got this bus that we've had in the road, we need buses to keep our system running. We put them in our capital plan. And our capital plan, my job and Felix's job is to make sure it gets in the long-range transportation, that it's consistent with the long-range transportation plan, and then goes into the TIP. And then it also goes into the CIB if we're going to use Metro money for it, in both long-term and short-term. And then short-term, it'll go into the capital spending plan for Metro, or it'll go into a federal grant application that we'll develop. And then there will be a state application that follows after that.
One of the things that Billy's saying that I would highlight is, if you look at the columns on that chart, the first and the second columns are really, for lack of a better word, assembling wish lists. So getting your project on the long-range transportation plan, on the transportation improvement program, on Metro's capital improvement budget doesn't get you $1 of money. It makes you, basically what the Metropolitan Planning Organization, what Metro Planning is determining is your project consistent with those region-wide and local plans, so that it should be eligible for funding. So it's really, I would refer to those first two columns as that's your hunting license. Mm-hmm. You haven't landed the big game yet.
And then the other thing is those are all applications. It's not a go, we don't have any money yet. The word there is critical. We still don't have money in hand. The fastest way is through the capital spending plan. Once something is in the capital spending plan, it still takes two or 3 months for the official memo to get to us that we can use the money in that plan. And then the federal applications and state applications take even longer. It's kind of the shortest amount of time I've ever seen us get something from point A to B to securing the money is 2 months. And that was when everything was aligned and everything was in the plan. all the plans. That leads us to some simple terms that are often thrown out there: authorization, appropriation, allocation, application, and award. Authorization is the higher level of funding. It's when a governing body establishes that they are going to fund certain things at certain levels. So the example would be the most recent infrastructure bill by the federal government, known as the IIJA, or Metro Nashville adopting a capital improvement budget. Those are their long-range goals, and again, as Steve said, this is ideals. If we, in an ideal world and money was unlimited, this is what we would like to see happen. Then you get down to the appropriation level. That happens on a year-to-year basis with funders. When Congress adopts a budget for us to get operating and capital assistance, or when Metro adopts its budget so that we have capital projects or an operating project. Just a note, that's our formula money, the regular reoccurring solid stuff that we can bank on for the most part, if they adopt their budgets. There's the competitive grants, and that's where what I would call for projects or a notice of funding opportunity. That's when we get to learn about what the details behind what the funder wants to see in funding a project. That notice of funding opportunity is critical to determining whether it's something that'll fit with what we wanted to buy, build, or fund. Once we figure that out, then we submit an application. Even if it's formula money, we still have to submit an application. Once there's a federal award, then I also have to submit an application for the state money to go along to get the match for that. If we get a federal award, we have already submitted an application for it. We have to submit another application in the federal system that basically says we're going to follow all the rules and here's the scope, and it's a contract that we assign to get that money. We still don't have it, even though we may have been given an award. And then that final word is award, and that's the contract that says you've got money and you're able to continue to go forward and spend and build, buy, or do the planning that you wanted to do.
And if I could amplify a point Billy made on this, Walter's sitting in the cheap seats. So for the staff people sitting in the room, because we go through the internal process of identifying projects, selecting them. So very often staff people ask the question, hey, I submitted a project, you included it in the capital improvement plan, the board adopted the capital improvement plan, why can't I go out and buy that stuff now? What Billy's talking about when that grant is awarded is the first moment in time where we're actually authorized to begin incurring expenses, unless there's a really exceptional situation where we would get advance authority, but that's in the accelerated class, so we'll skip that one.
I wasn't going to say that word, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't anybody out there say, well, Steve said we could ask for accelerated authority. You can't.
There's a lot of talk out there. It was really exciting to see the newest infrastructure bill passed because it increased and recognized public transit as a valid form of transportation in our country. It's still not funded anywhere near what federal highways gets, but transit is this last infrastructure bill put a focus on transit funding to the tune of, for an example, our regular formula dollars went up from 23.8 million, or 23.8 million to over $30 million, an increase of almost $7 million annually. That's huge. That's huge. We haven't seen that kind of increase in funding from the federal government since they've been adopting transportation bills. So yay. There are a bunch of programs in the IIJA. There's 2 slides of all of the different funding pots available through the IIJA. The ones that are in bold on the slide in front of you are the ones that are transit specific. You have to be a FTA grantee or a FTA grant recipient to be even eligible to get that money. And so those are the ones that are, we can go after. But that's not all the ones that we can go after to fund transit projects. The other programs that are identified on that list could possibly fund a project that we want to do. I'm going to go back. The raise is on this one. I will give an example. The raise is not an FTA-funded project. It is an OST, Office of the Secretary project. So those are big regional projects that could be funded, used to fund a transit project. An example would be, we got a Tiger grant a few years ago to do improvements on the transit signal priority, and on the Murfreesboro Road corridor. That was a Tiger grant. The raise is a reiteration of that under the this new funding bill. There's some federal highway grants that we can rely on, congestion mitigation, air quality. The details behind that program and the scope of that program align nicely with transit projects that improve air quality. And then there are surface transportation grants that are also funded by the Federal Highway Administration. But this is where nuances come in, where those funds are funneled through different entities. The CMAQ dollars, or congestion mitigation air quality funds, go through the state. The state awards that money. So there's a whole nother application process with that. The surface transportation grants are administered regionally through the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So it's just, the planning department has a good knowledge of where these programs are at, and we're still learning the IIJA programs and all of the ones that would fit with some of the projects that we have in our in-motion plan and our capital plan. I wanted to give some examples of how we've found some funding in the past recent years to help implement what we're doing in our capital plan. The HOPE grant, with that acronym, stands for Helping Obtain Prosperity for Everyone. It was designed and intended for areas that have experienced persistent poverty. North Nashville Transit Center aligns very well with what they were proposing to do, and we were able to secure $200,000 to support the public engagement with the development of the North Nashville Transit Center. The Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplement Appropriations Act is another grant award that we received through the Greater Nashville Regional Council, $870,000 to support pedestrian access to connect the North Nashville Transit Center to the surrounding neighborhood. And then we were awarded FTA COVID-19 Research Demonstration Grant, and we received $585,000 to support our ongoing research with Vanderbilt and to improve the quality of our passenger counting data and predict passenger crowding in real time on the buses and push that data forward for our passengers to use. Oh, questions? I'm going to go back to the appropriations, the annual money for transit programs. The funding programs for FY22, that pie chart shows that urbanized area funding takes about a little bit over a quarter, 25%, 30%. And then you've got your state of good repair money. That's mostly for rail projects under the state of good repair. The bus state of good repair funding did not increase as much as rail did. Capital investment grants, those are your big grants to do bus rapid transit or light rail. And then there's all those other little pots that were shown on the previous two pages. The $30 million that we get in our annual, or again, I mentioned that before, we've got our increase in funding went up $7 million for FY22. So that the IIJA has definitely helped us with improving funding available for us to develop transit in Nashville. But with a caveat, we need to be consistently reminding Metro that we can't get that dollar without match. We need that all those dollars are only funded at a certain level, and we've got to be at a local level have to commit to transit. So there's all those different levels with the federal and the state programs.
Is that local include state and Metro or just Metro?
It is separate. So
Okay.
in the state of Tennessee, we are blessed that the state of Tennessee has agreed to match transit project, federal awards at 10%. Sometimes even more than that if we have a really good project and it aligns with what TDOT wants to do. But we also need to secure the typical average match for most of the projects that we do is 20%. So state's going to do the 10%, and then Metro's got to come up with the other 10%. But if we're going to go after a capital investment grant, those funding levels are going to change, and there's a much larger requirement of local dollar to match the federal dollar.
Typically, what you see on the federal formula side is the federal government's interest is in non-federal match. So if Tennessee wanted to put in, it's 80% federal. So if Tennessee wanted to put in 20%, that'd be fine with the feds. If Tennessee didn't put anything in and Metro put in 20, that would be fine with the feds, as long as it's not, and you can't match federal money with federal money. So we couldn't say, take an urbanized area formula grant, get CMAQ money through TDOT, and then use it to make it 100% federal. There's a couple, again, for the advanced class, there's a couple very nuanced exceptions to that, but they come up pretty rarely. And the match has to be first dollar in, because when we're submitting those applications, we're already having to certify that we have that match available. You can't really do it as a, we promise we'll get it. Give us our grant and we promise you that we'll get it. Because that has been problematic for them in the past.
It's very difficult. I think this portion of the thing is like, grants is under planning because it takes a lot of planning to get the dollars to come in. And it's not like a nonprofit where you can get access to foundational grants in a relatively fast, quick basis. There's a lot of rules that have to be followed with federal and state dollars. And so we just keep planning and set up your good plan, and we'll find the money. We'll find the money. I can't believe I said those words.
I just saw 12 people starting to write something back there.
The board develops a really good plan. We we plan projects, and then we've got to still get through this process. But you've got to, it's planning that makes the money happen and get the money. I mean, if we don't plan it, it's very difficult to make sure that we can get the money to hand.
I think the other thing that Billy illustrates in the slide is that, so you saw from the earlier slide, there's dozens of programs in the IIJA, and we only listed the ones that are most closely related. There's probably hundreds of them out there. But on the transit side, the overwhelming majority of the money is in that very small number, including urbanized area formula, which is critically important to us. State of good repair, where we do get some money out of that program on the bus side. Actually, the RTA benefits tremendously with the STAR, gets a significant chunk of that money because it is more dominant toward rail. And then capital investment grants are those big discretionary grants to do things like bus rapid transit or light rail. And then everything else, those other dozens and dozens of programs are kind of smushed into that other quarter of the money. So some of those programs may sound very attractive, but it might be a $5 million national appropriation and you're competing with 50 other, organizations for $5 million. And you kind of have to ask yourself, is this really worth the effort, to get a $100,000 grant? Maybe.
All right, back to me. Thank you, Billy. And I know Billy went through the overall process on at the federal level for the most part, and talk about some of the funding sources. But, in looking at how we match those projects to different funding sources, there's a couple of things that we look at and kind of, some categories as you see here. But the process is the same, basically, federal, state, local, whatever other we look at. So you have your predictable, reliable. So those are kind of stable funding sources like the formula fund money that comes to to this urban area. We know that we have a history. We know pretty much what we can expect to get. So it makes it easier for us to plan around that. You have the predictable, competitive. These are competitive opportunities, and the predictable portion is because we've been successful. We made no assumptions at all that we're going to get the money, but we kind of have been successful in the past. We know what the funder is looking for. Improve Act, which is state money administered by TDOT, is one example. Actually, we utilize that, good funding of that for the North Nashville Transit Center as well. You have your niche competitive. I call this kind of opportunistic. We may have a project that we're working on, and all of a sudden an opportunity comes along, and it's like, hey, it seems like we have this portion of this project or a component of a project that fits very well there. Let's shoot for it. And Billy talked about some of them with the HOPE, the COVID-19 research, and the CRISA money for pedestrian improvements around North Nashville Transit Center. Then you have the moonshots. As the word implies, these are, you have a small chance sometimes, and it's a large project. By default, it's going to be a more complex and competitive project. So you just don't jump on those when you see a notice of funding opportunity. Ideally, it's something that you have been planning for and you've been working ahead of time, so you know what you're going to do with those. Steve mentioned the capital investment grant. That's the funding through the FTA that allows you to build high-capacity transit, for example, projects, and the Tiger that Billy mentioned earlier. Then you have the others. So this is maybe where the lines are a little fuzzy. So you have to be careful about how you're going to go after those, because maybe it's too much effort for what you're going to get in return, and for maybe a slim chance of getting that money. So you have to weigh those. And partnerships, this is when it's a project that we may not be the leads, but there's a transit component on another agency that is leading a project, and it's an opportunity for us to partner with that agency. We've done that with NDOT. There's a transit headways management and congestion management on Charlotte. It's a federal highway project, so we're not that familiar with federal highway, but they are leading that, and it has a transit component related to the signals that we may benefit from. So those are kind of the, just the categories that we're looking when we do that. Okay. This chart is just basically to illustrate what we've been talking about. We have our priorities, and some of them may be funded, some of them may not be funded. So you're going to have a funder that have their own priorities. So ideally, you're going to look for that sweet spot that your priorities and the priorities of the funders may align, and creates for a good opportunity for your project to be successful. At the same time, you have to be careful not to be distracted by some of the free money that comes with that. That may sound good, but again, there's a risk to it, or maybe it's just not that closely related to your core mission. So you can get distracted. Maybe you don't have the capacity, and maybe it just strain you in other areas if you try to go after some of that money. So ideally, you want to look for that area of where the two converge.
Oh, if you'd stay on that slide for a second, Felix. One of the things I'd point out, one of the things I think Felix and Billy do exceptionally well is all this is kind of the outcome of ongoing and continuous communication with the funding partners. So, GNRC and TDOT and FTA, we talk to them all the time about, what we're planning. With NDOT in the mix now, how do we advance corridor improvements, in collaboration, so that as these opportunities come up, you're not just sort of knee-jerk reacting to something that popped up in the Federal Register. You're having those ongoing communications. If you remember back to when you adopted the capital plan a couple months ago, Felix was talking about the Improve Act money at the state level, which was a new source when the Improve Act passed in 2017. Well, it's a competitive grant process for capital projects, so it's not guaranteed. You have to put in applications year after year. So up until this year's capital plan, we had never assumed that we would receive any Improve Act money. This year, we started putting in projections of assumptions, because over that period of years and working with TDOT, we have a pretty good sense of what it is they like to fund, where they want to prioritize those investments, and where we can link those up with what's in our strategic service and capital plan. So we have pretty good sense that if we want to do, if we want to do something like, bus stop upgrades and pedestrian improvements connected with transit stops, it fits very well into their criteria for that project. Bus replacements, not so much. They have not tended to be, that's not tended to be where they prioritize.
So illustrating, what funders' priorities may look like, this is from FTAs related to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So they very clearly lay out what their priorities are going to be for funding, and some of them are maybe areas that we are already working on, like safety or modernization of the fleet. But there's other areas where they may be new programs or programs where they added more money to it because they want to put a greater emphasis on. Climate equity, which are great things at the same time that as a transit agency we should be pursuing and be mindful of. So this helps us to get an idea on what projects may fit within some of these areas. At the same time, you always want to be careful and a little bit nimble, in my opinion, because priorities change from the funders and administrations change. So you don't want to be all in on something that may be a little not too clear in the beginning, and then finding your way later down the road in a position that is going to be more difficult for you to be able to develop and put that project into implementation. And then we want to finish with some thoughts for you as a board to think of, some takeaways as you ponder more about what this process looks like. First of all, I cannot emphasize too much how, the good planning is fundamental for these, having, a plan that is going to guide your process. And it helps you develop good projects. And it's a lot easier once you have a good project to go and look for the funding for it than the other way around. So at the same time, as I mentioned on that graphic a couple of slides ago, make sure to look for those opportunities for aligning with what the priorities of the funders look like. Number 3, build broad support. If you have, different agencies, different people understanding what comes from your planning process, they get behind it, and it's a lot easier to make strides when you're trying to put those projects, take them to fruition.
On this point too, the opposite also applies. I know when I talk to our FTA administrator about specific projects, one of the first things she always asks me is this going to be controversial? So if you have that broad community support, then it becomes a whole lot easier for other funding partners to jump on board.
No, that's an excellent point. Niche money is could be helpful, but it can be any process takes time. We're a small department, and sometimes we have to be very careful in what we decide. I know there's funding opportunities that come and emails from Steve, and I say, I don't think we can do that now, Steve. If you don't want to, if you still want to see this other project finish.
See, they turned me down too, guys.
On that note, it's any money that we get, there's a ton of rules. So every year I come before you with certifications and assurances. Steve and our attorney sign off annually on a list of things that we say we'll do for the federal government to keep this money. And that list, that 2-page list has usually got 500 pages of stuff behind it. And then I've got another 500 pages in my office that I know they're going to ask me questions on, or the rest of the staff questions on. So with the money comes rules. Even the regular money, there's rules. And so it's like, okay, you got to play by the rules. And are we willing to play by the rules to get this and keep it going?
Yeah, remember the word cloud that I showed? Yeah. The project delivery is going to be important. I think you start developing a reputation when you deliver on a project that gives confidence to the funders, not only for future funding opportunities. And the opposite can happen if you don't deliver. So it's going to be a lot more scrutiny on you if you're not able, and then you want to have more money. And what's that?
Or if you're consistent.
No. Well, that hasn't been our case. We're very good in
Very
delivering.
good.
So, but at the same time, is it an opportunity? If you don't have the capacity, do you want to maybe look for a partnership to be able to better develop that project?
I think a good example on this one was, to be perfectly frank, when we got the Tiger money originally to do the transit signal project in Murfreesboro Pike, we struggled with that project because it was outside our normal area of comfort. And then now we started bringing on what I'll call new areas of expertise. Trey came on board, first engineer we ever hired. Now we have Lydia on board, second engineer we ever hired, who actually knows about traffic signals. Not sure how much you knew before you got involved in that project, but you're something of an expert now. So one of the decisions for a board to make is, as we start venturing into new types of activities, it's the investment in building up the capacity to deliver on those projects. Otherwise, you end up in that quagmire. The good news is we got a big grant to do thus and such. The bad news is we got a big grant to do thus and such, and we have no clue what to do with it.
And then, there's no such thing as free money, and everything has a cost, especially longer term. You have to account for what is that going to cost you and how you're going to maintain and sustain that project over time. There's money's come in different colors and with different strings attached. So number 7, if you want to be able to, those that are more restrictive, you want to be able to use them specifically for some things that they be better for, and that allows you the ability to preserve some of that flexible money for those projects that are maybe more difficult, that you want that flexibility to have with you. One thing that we've learned, number 8, don't necessarily jump on technology of first generation, or you're going to be paying for it for a long time. So this is true for, with the pace of technology and how fast it changes is always something to keep in mind. So you have to, some things look very great, but you have to wait whether that's going to be what is going to help you down the road and how is that going to perform overall and for your service. And then large and complex projects, any project is complex, but large ones are even more so. So you have to be comfortable with the fact that it may take years to accumulate that money. You have to be comfortable with the fact that there's going to be many funding sources associated with that. For WeGo Central, I think it was 21 different funding sources that went into that for a $54 million project. So that's common thing with large projects. And then how comfortable are you with risk? There's always going to be some risk associated with any of these, but there's some greater risk on some of them, from the source that you're applying for to who you are going to partner with. So it's something for for you to all think about when we think about these potential projects, and keep that in mind as to how it's going to impact what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that's the last slide. We'll be happy to. Hopefully, they didn't lose you in the way, and you have some questions, we'll be happy to answer and discuss more with you.
I'll just start by saying, thank God you understand this, because it is complicated, right? And I think you all do an extraordinary job of finding the money to match with the projects. I'd say this was incredibly helpful, because you hear these days all this talk about, oh, there's all this federal money laying around, right? I mean, we can get anything, and to me, this brings it back down to reality, that it's not just falling out of the sky, right? So that's helpful. Also, Steve and I were talking about this ahead of time. It's so important not to let the tail wag the dog when it comes to this. And so I agree, there's probably funds you don't need to go after. If it doesn't align with our plan, then you're just going to waste your time. And so I think being strategic and knowing what your needs are and your plan is before you worry about funding. My last statement is a question. So let's say that in a perfect world, in 3 years, we pass a referendum that gives us dedicated source of funds locally for transit. So those dollars go into a pool. Are those used for match? Are those match dollars? Or are they also primary dollars you're still going to have to go through the patchwork quilt of funding, correct?
Right. They can be both, but especially for the large projects, and one of the programs Billy highlighted was what's called the Capital Investment Grant Program. Those are those big grants for things like bus rapid transit. And one of the advantages, Jessica and I talk about this all the time, dedicated funding doesn't solve every problem, because people who have dedicated, say, sales tax, you have a recession, you watch your revenues dip, and you go through the same business cycles everybody else does. But knowing that you have a reliable flow of funds over a period of years that you might bond against or what have you, you can go into that capital investment grant process and essentially overmatch. So you'll rate higher in a project rating process. Theoretically, a capital investment grant could be funded at 80% federal, 20% non-federal, like the rest of the program. I haven't seen one of those in probably 20 years. 50-50 is more or less standard, and there's cities with significant dedicated funding going in for 33 federal, 67 on some of the bigger ones. So that's a big advantage in being able to do it. And to that topic of preserving the flexible money, that money tends to be your most flexible, so it really allows you to kind of focus those niche programs into something specific. One of the benefits of getting the HOPE grant, and that was something that Billy and Felix specifically, I'd never even heard of it before, and they're like, hey, can we put in? Sure, why not? Essentially, it freed up $200,000 for the rest of that project, because it's not as though we weren't going to do any public engagement, but by being able to put that funder priority into a project that was this board's priority, we were able to free up some of those other resources to do other elements of that project.
I really like the part of the conversation about whether or not you have capacity. And then how, if you want to take a risk when you don't have capacity or you question your capacity, how you sort of go through that process to figure that out. But I think y'all are honest enough with each other, which seems to be very helpful.
I think part of that's a strategic, even separate from the issue of funding, or do you go after a grant or do you not go after a grant, is when we look at our strategic plans and say, if we really, to serve this area properly, we need to start developing the knowledge of things we haven't historically done. It is taking that leap and saying, well, gee, we need to put more effort on an engineering side, or more on analytics, or more on, planning depth, or whatever those areas of expertise, might be, so that you put yourselves in position, because it will definitely be one of the rating characteristics of really any significant grant program at the federal level is, are we confident that this grantee will be able to carry it out?
So I asked for it and I got it. And I applaud you, I had a hint how complex it was working in government myself, but I'm so glad this wasn't the line I chose when I began at the beginning of my career. I have to agree that, hats off. This is really, really complicated, and I'm grateful that we have the right people doing that. I did make, I made a few notes that, build broad support for projects and initiatives, and I feel like that's a place that the board, can help, right? One of the questions that I have is regarding the state match and Metro, and reminding Metro that we can't get the money, without the match. I'm trying to understand a little bit better. It sounds like the state is aware that transportation is infrastructure and, is ready. And am I hearing that Metro just doesn't seem to get that? I mean, it's Metro's buses is what bothers me, so.
No, that's not
Okay.
really the case at all. First of all, on the grant matches, that's almost a given. Now, there are years, there have been years in the recent past that Metro just was not in a position to issue bonds or and that was true for schools, and it was true for the police department, it was true for everybody else, and we fell into that as well. But certainly on grant matches, that's typically the no-brainer. We can go to mayor's office, Metro Finance Council, and say, yeah, we can bring in $20 if you give us one. We've very, very rarely gotten questions on that. And we've actually gotten a great amount of support, which has been very helpful. Knowing that a lot of TDOT's focus is more on the infrastructure side as opposed to rolling stock, we've gotten great support from Metro on our bus replacement program. over the years. I mean, they know how important having, the fleet in good condition is. So I would say, generally not. It's, when we've had challenges, it's tended to be the same years that fill in the blank. The library, the school district, everybody's had challenges just because there wasn't the fiscal capacity to do it.
That's really helpful clarification because, again, with this being the first, presentation on this, it does sound like, yeah, and it's obviously I recognize that, the state has a humongous rainy day, fund, for example, and so that's a really helpful clarification on how this works.
But
Thank you.
where it would play in, Mary, for sure, would be just a hypothetical, well, maybe not quite hypothetical, but not quite here yet project. So, we have funding from Metro to do corridor planning in Murfreesboro Pike towards some level of high-capacity transit. So that would be a project that would likely rate very well in the capital investment grant program for something like bus rapid transit. But now, okay, let's say it's programmed in the Metro Nashville Transportation Plan as a $400 million project. So let's assume you're going to say, okay, we're going to pursue $200 million in the capital investment grant program. That means $200 million non-federal. Where's that coming from? So that's sort of the big question of it. It will be very hard for that project. It may rate extraordinarily high for things like ridership potential, current ridership, economic development potential, social equity, all of those things when Billy and Felix were talking about funder priorities that are high up on the FTA's list for rating a project. But the other one is, are you going to have the fiscal capacity to deliver it? So one of the boxes we're going to have to check is, where's your non-federal money coming from? And that would be an open question right now.
Thank you so much for the short presentation. I think you did a really great job of going through the ins and outs in such a short period of time. I do realize this was not the advanced class, so, but thank you. It was a great overview, and I appreciate it so much. To hear everyone else try to start to get it, how complex the funding is. That's what the TCLA is all about. On some level, right, to share how complex this issue is to get funded and get projects chosen and funded and built and executed. So thank you for that. And thank you for going through the responses. Steve, you did a great job. I understand it better also, and thank you for saying, using the big, like the Murfreesboro Pike bus rapid transit, for instance, whereas, yes, we could go and potentially get a local match pretty easily, except for a big transformative project like that. Where is that going to come from as we continue to grow leaps and bounds as a city? How are we going to do those? So I appreciate this conversation.
Thank you.
Oh, one more thing. It takes a special kind of person to reserve investment from, to keep from investing in the Laserdisc when the DVD is right around the corner, right? And I think that's what you're getting at between the leading edge and bleeding edge. Like if you're first
Right.
out, are you investing in a Laserdisc?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a great point, and one of the things I would always recommend you come back to is, what can this do in the short term to improve the lives of our customers, of people who ride our system, people who might ride our system? Are we doing it because it will make somebody's life better? Or are we doing it because we want to get a headline, in a science journal or something?
Thank you, Jan. Anything else for your committee?
No, that concludes, I'm like, what is she waiting on? That concludes the new initiatives committee report, sorry.
We just slow walking. We try not to, what is it?
So sorry, I missed my cue.
No, you're good.
Back to you, Gail.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Miller. Well, that was a great committee meeting. Thank you so much. Interesting. And I look forward to your annual report every year, Billy.
Now you know why we put those certifications and assurances on the consent agenda. You really don't want us to walk through them all.
That's okay. But now we know what we're walking through, so we support you 100%. So thank you for your good work all year with this complex work. Mr. Searcy, welcome.
Well, thank you.
So we sort of switched it around, so you're up.
Well, I'm not up,
Nick's up.
but Nick is up, that's right. Let's hear the financial report as compared to budget.
We did that.
You did
with
that
the,
already.
Yes, we
Okay.
did. We sort of put that under information only items.
Okay.
So you're down to just the agency safety plan update with Nick.
All right. Please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Committee Chair Searcy, Madam Chair, and you all can rest assured that the next time I present, I'm bringing props.
A busting water
Yeah.
bottle, so don't get
Billy,
much
open the
better.
door, I'm
Or
coming through.
candy.
Yeah.
Right. So I wanted to just talk about an update to our agency safety plan. This FTA released some new requirements under the bipartisan infrastructure law. And, you know, it requires us to adjust and make some additions to our agency safety plan. One of the biggest ones is that it's now required for us to have a joint labor and management safety committee, where it's 50% frontline employees selected by the union and 50% management. The purpose of that new committee is to get together to come up with strategies on how to reduce workplace incidents and illnesses, and how do we get more and more frontline employees to identify hazards or concerns and then suggest ways to prevent them from occurring. One of the other big changes is that this new safety committee is now required to approve an updated agency safety plan prior to it coming before the board. So that committee will approve the agency safety plan, and then we'll bring it back before the board, and the board must approve it before December 31st of 2022. So I kind of want to, you know, as Billy and Felix salivate over planning and spending, I salivate over safety stuff. So when I get a chance to talk about it or bring it back up and refresh your mind, it brings me a lot of joy. So I want to kind of really quickly go back to how will we use this committee to help reduce workplace incidences while using the SMS, the safety management system. We started hearing rumblings of this SMS in 2019, and then the culmination of it was, you know, some laws passed down in 2020. This board should remember in April of 2020, you all approved the agency safety management policy statement, which was simply just a statement that said from the CEO down to the newly hired employee that safety is a priority. Where this new committee will use the bulk of its strength now to help implement strategies is in the SRM, the safety risk management. And that's the process for identifying hazards or risk and then figuring out strategies, mitigation strategies on how we reduce them. And then the other component of SMS is safety assurance. So once we have these mitigation strategies in place, then we've got to look back at them and say, do they work? Are they working? In the process of eliminating some risks, did we incur others, or did we mitigate them down to a reasonable standard? And then the last component of the SMS that this committee would be looking at is safety promotion, which is constantly training and communication about how do we create a positive safety culture within the organization. And so, you know, how we almost kind of got a jump on this new law back in 2020 when we were thinking, how do we get employees, frontline employees, comfortable enough and confident enough to submit concerns or hazards, or before they become safety events, how do we get them to tell us about them, right? So as we were looking at it, I didn't want anything that was laborious and cumbersome. And so I built from scratch. I'm a techie and a nerd. And a computer science major. So I built a mobile app from scratch for our employees to be able to report these hazards or incidents. And so if you're looking on the screen, you can see that there's 5 different ways that they can submit. And this is for iPhone and unfortunately Android. Hopefully no Android users, but I see. Gotcha. God bless you all.
For the love of the Android, huh?
So they can submit these concerns anonymously, or they can make themselves known by using an online form that comes straight to the safety department. They can call our hotline. They can email pictures, they can report it to dispatch, or have a supervisor meet them face to face. So we wanted to take the guesswork out of memorizing a URL or a email address or a phone number, where they simply can open up their phone, open up the app, submit a concern, and it comes to us, and we begin the mitigation process. And to date, we've had over 800 downloads of this app. And our folks are really using it. And I want to make sure that, as we're processing the data that we're getting in, that we're clear that a lot of these the hazards and stuff that are coming in are not that buses are malfunctioning or issues that are big enough that would, disrupt service. A lot of these concerns that are coming in are about the environment that we're operating in. So an example would be a tree limb is hanging over into the street, and it could potentially rub some paint off the bus. Well, our operators are now saying, hey, there's a tree limb that's hanging out over the street. Can we get with NDOT or TDOT and figure out how we can, reduce that down? And so that is the beauty of, and why I feel so confident that this new safety committee, we already have a jump on it because we've been getting information from our frontline employees since we developed this app. And so I'm really, really pleased and thank Steve a lot for allowing us to be innovative in how we, kind of reduce a lot of these hazards. So again.
He didn't even ask for a grant for that.
I didn't. So again, the bipartisan infrastructure law.
You haven't been trained properly.
I haven't, I know. I'm getting there though. So it just requires a joint labor management safety committee will use the information that's coming in not only from the safety app, but also from members of that committee that are frontline employees to continue to mitigate and produce a overall positive safety culture. And then I'll come back with props in December to bring forth the agency safety plan for your approval. That concludes my report. I'll take any questions if there are any.
I just want to say it's good, and that don't take this the wrong way, that I already had a standing commitment. I just want to say, I think that app is fantastic, and if there is ever a time you need us to help pilot in different neighborhoods, I'm on board. But I have an Android, and we'll talk about that later.
I apologize.
Nick, is there a way, or I know you've been tracking both the stuff that comes in through the app and then how you dispose of it. Is there a way of getting that feedback back to the employees?
Yeah, absolutely. So if the employees do submit it and they choose to remain anonymous, what we do is we use our internal communication via our WeGo TV, or we use our bulletin boards. When we mitigate that hazard coming in, then we'll post it so that employee can see it, even though they submitted it anonymously. If they submit it and they can put their information in and ask for a follow-up once we've mitigated it or completed that request, then we communicate directly back to the employee.
So is the app like on the App Store, or how do
It
they
is.
download the
Yep,
app? Yeah.
it is. And our training team does a phenomenal job with bringing, all new hires. They walk them through how to download it, how to, use the exact form, everything. They do a phenomenal job of it.
That's pretty cool. And you developed it all without help, without a grant. I mean,
Yes, ma'am.
that's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
Congratulations. That has to be helpful for people.
Yeah, that's incredible. Is that under other duties as assigned, or was that part of the job description originally?
I'll let Steve answer that. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I just appreciate the innovation.
Oh, I know, it's incredible. And it's for employees only or for customers too?
So I think as we continue to develop it, initially we're thinking just to do it internally, but I think it is a powerful enough tool that we can roll it out to the communities to help, have them start to understand how to use it and submit stuff as well. There's already a lot of channels for them to do it, but I think this could potentially be a powerful channel for them.
It's,
yeah.
I mean, anybody could download it. I mean, it's in the apps. That's how I got it. I got it through the App Store. We tend to want to channel, like riders, general public, through customer care, because all of a sudden, there tend to be multiple issues associated with an observation. And then if they see anything safety related, if it comes in through customer care as being safety related, it automatically gets channeled over to Nick's area.
And so what I'm understanding for this app, though, is that the metrics that you're getting will somehow go through the new safety committee?
Correct. Yeah, and so that committee now will be looking at it with eyes from frontline as well. So frontline employees can
And
submit
management.
it, exactly,
Right.
frontline employees and management. So frontline employees will submit it, but then they don't know the inner workings or coming up, help with the strategies. And we do that through other committees that we form, but this just makes it a lot more formal. And then, we'll work together to come up with mitigation strategies.
Incredible. Great work, thanks.
And the committee, where the two presentations kind of tie together, so this structure and the change in the IIJA with respect to the safety committees is now one of the requirements that we sign off on the assurances. And you can rest assured that when we get audited by FTA, they'll be saying, can we see the minutes of your safety committee meetings? So it all kind of goes together.
One of the things that I think we may get some advantage, Jan, I'm thinking about you, is there's got to be some break we get on insurance. The cost of our liability plans will have to be impacted in some way positively by this.
Yeah, and clearly,
This
because we're
program.
so heavily self-insured, anything that reduces, the whole idea behind this safety management systems approach is by historically, particularly on the bus side, the SMS approach takes more what historically people did on the rail side, because accidents in rail tend to be much more catastrophic. The bus side, frankly, the history is you have an accident, you investigate, you figure out what went wrong, and you correct it. The SMS approach is you look for those things that could go wrong before they go wrong, and you try to mitigate that risk. So to Nick's point, with the hazards that are being identified, some of them you say, whoa, that's something we got to deal with, and that's how he categorizes them, and we got to deal with it quickly. Others you say, that's kind of the cost of doing business. An operator could report, oh my God, it's 10 o'clock on Saturday night. There's a lot of pedestrians on Lower Broadway. Yeah, be careful.
If you can figure out how to mitigate that, we would all appreciate
My
it.
goodness.
I mean, there's no doubt that that's a hazard, but it's a hazard that's part of our operating environment. So you have to mitigate it in other ways.
All right, what do we have next on our agenda, Madam Chairperson? No, not Trey,
Yeah, Trey.
not the Trey.
I bit my
let's
tongue
hear-
during
let's
the
hear it.
capital discussion, so, I'm ready to go. I'm in the unenviable, typical position occupied by Felix to have to deliver the last presentation, so here we go. So, they want to provide an update on our transit asset management plan. So, transit asset management is a tool that we utilize that prioritizes our funding based on the condition and the maintenance of our transit assets, like our vehicles, our equipment, and our facilities that we operate out of. Very much common with the theme of the day. This is a federal requirement. This is one of those strings that are attached to being able to utilize our grant dollars. And this one came down from 2016. We provided an initial asset management plan in 2018. And this is our first update to our first plan that we conducted this year. So every 4 years, we'll be going through this process. The plan introduces a concept called a state of good repair, which is the condition in which an asset is able to operate at a full level of performance. And that enhances our safety, reduces maintenance costs, increases reliability, and improves our performance. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead to the end here and just let you know that we utilize this plan every year when we craft our capital improvement plan for the agency. So it's kind of in sync with everything that you've heard from Billy and Nick going through today. So in the development of our plan, there's several steps involved, but I do want to highlight a couple. As we started looking at our update, we had things such as our plan policies and goals, our asset inventory that we were able to update in the update of this plan. We utilized our consultant CDM Smith to perform our facilities inspections, and they utilized subconsultant Win Engineering to perform that inspection of all 8 of our now facilities as part of that condition assessment highlighted on number 3. We then analyze where we are with our state of good repair targets, and then provide our investment scenarios, which is that part where it comes back around to our annual capital improvement plan. And just overall, we adopted our initial plan in October of 2018, and the plan was updated in September 30th, 2022 this year. So again, this follows the prioritization of our federal dollars and where we already place state of good repair as a high priority within our capital budget. So our capital budget priorities, if you'll think back kind of the discussions we have in May and June of every year, focuses on the idea of let's keep the first things first and let's have an order to the capital dollars that we have. With number 1 being our safety and regulatory projects, what needs to keep us moving safely, and what do we need to do to meet those requirements of our funders. Next, what you'll usually see is operating budget support. So anything that gets transferred over from capital to our annual operating, and then it's kind of what's left on the project front. And the first piece of that pie on the project front is our state of good repair project. So everything that comes into our asset management plan follows that state of good repair, falls into that bucket prior to us doing things such as business improvements, new expansive things that involve our service expansion or any business improvements. So we're addressing the condition of our assets prior to moving outside of that. It kind of goes to our discussion we had earlier about making sure we have that internal capacity before we start branching out. So we utilize a metric called a useful life benchmark, which is our expected life cycle that a given capital asset can have, and each asset category has different ones. So for instance, our full-size buses have a 14-year useful life benchmark. Our access vehicles, 8 years, non-revenue vehicles, 8 years. Our other rubber-tired equipment, that would be things like we have a bucket truck that we have on the facility side, our tow truck. So larger pieces of forklifts, larger pieces of equipment, they have a 14-year, and then facilities are a little different. I'll touch on that here in a second. So on our facilities, there's a metric that's utilized called the Transit Economic Requirements Model. Essentially what we do, and this is what CDM Smith performed for us earlier this year, is they'll take a given facility and it breaks down into about up to 10 components that fall into that part of that facility. So things like the shell that's illustrated here, the exterior of the building, that has a component, and then subcomponents like our roof or our exterior wrapping that goes around that building, and the condition of that subcomponent rolls into the component, which rolls into the asset facility. And all of that is scored based on a term rating score of 1 to 5, where 1 is a facility that has considerable problems with it, you're not able to operate out of as designed, and a 5 is basically a brand new facility. So the useful life benchmark for facilities is a term score of 3.0. So how do we do? Looking back at our 2022 update on our 2018 plan, and generally there's no surprises here. We were able to match or exceed our planned goals on full-size buses. We've had a steady stream of those vehicles coming in. Our replacement plan has been able to be executed generally throughout the last 4 years. And on facilities, we've been able to address the capital projects that have been highlighted in the plan. The areas that we struggled, no surprises to the board, are the supply chain difficulties with acquiring new access vehicles. And those similarly, we saw a little bit on our non-revenue vehicles, so our pool vehicles that we utilize for non-service. Good news on that front, starting last month, we started receiving a few of those vehicles. So those targets are starting to come in line. We have about another dozen that are on order right now. looking at our facilities ratings, in general, all of our facilities meet that state of good repair target of having a term score of 3.0 or greater. We have 3 facilities with a score of 3, several facilities with a score of 4, and of course, our Hillsborough Transit Center is a brand new facility, and that's a score of 5. So our facilities numbers in this plan from our previous plan expanded because we've added the substantial shelter structures that are at the Nolensville and Welshwood intersection as part of our Nolensville Stop Improvement Project, and we have the new construction of the Hillsborough Transit Center. So this slide will continue to update as we add facilities to our plan. And then we look at our 2026 targets and setting our goals for our update 4 years from now. And in the plan itself, there are year-by-year incremental targets to hit between 2022 and 2026 or to consider. And essentially, we're assuming that we're going to continue to maintain the condition of our facilities and our full-size bus fleet, and that we're going to start to see some relief in the other vehicles that we have on order. So you'll see their 2026 target of vehicles that exceed their useful benchmark. For those access vehicles, it's down to 20% from the current of 59. And for those non-revenue vehicles, it goes from 69 to 20 as well as we start to get those vehicles in. And that assumes essentially that we get what's on order now. So the 40 plus vehicles that are on order. And again, we have the ability to update those. So a couple just general summary points. The goals are that we have set forth in our transit asset management plan are reasonable and attainable with proper execution of our capital plan. It's all built in and is synergistic. The plan itself with this cover on it is available online on our website. You can download it underneath the publications tab on our website. There's a plan for MTA and also a plan for RTA as well. And then we'll continue to monitor the changes that we see in the supply chain and make adjustments to this plan as well as our capital investment plan as appropriate in between our update windows of 2022 and 2026. And that concludes my report. I'll take any questions.
Trey, I noticed that you had a goal of 25% in facilities being below useful life.
So what we did with that to calculate that is if I scan back to 2018, we had 33% that were below a term score of 3. If you'll recall, we did renovations to Central and Nestor, which bumped that took it from the 33 to the 0 it's currently at. So what we did is we held that 2 in the numerator of the column and just bumped it up to 8. So that's instead of 2/6 that are below the term score of 3, we went to 2/8. But right now we're at 0. So, and as we know, we have some projects that are ongoing at our Nestor facility and ultimately at our Central facility.
Well, I noticed Nestor is still a 3 even with updates.
That's right.
That's an optimistic 3. I think that.
Not all facilities are created equal. Yes, they're not.
We can thank the windstorm that took off half the roof, so Patrick had to put a new roof on it.
Thank you, Patrick. It does seem, though, that Nestor, we're going to need to make some strategic decisions, but we don't know exactly where the roads for the East Bank plan are going to end up, so. Yeah.
And then the major element for Central to keep it up is an upcoming project we have is the escalator rehabilitation project. That was probably the thing that would have brought that score down the most.
In all 3 of our main facilities, the lowest scoring subcomponent is conveyance, and we're working on that solicitation right now. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Searcy, anything further for your committee?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Certainly not that I want to discuss.
Well, thank you so much. That was a great report, a lot of great updates. I will turn this over to Mr. Bland for your CEO report.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members, and I'll keep it brief. We've kind of hit you with a lot of pretty technical information today. First of all, I know we sent out a note, but I hope you've all marked your calendars for 10 o'clock on Thursday, November 10th for our groundbreaking ceremony for North Nashville. As I say, it's a huge milestone in the project because the suits get out of the way and the folks in hard hats take over, and then things will move a whole lot faster. So based on the construction contracts that you awarded a couple months ago, we would anticipate opening that facility in time for our April 2024 service changes, where we'll be extending some services out to that center. I am pleased to report, as sad as we all were to lose Rita, to private law practice. We have a new Chief of Staff and Administration who will be starting with us at the end of the month. Gentleman's name is Vince Malone. He comes to us from TDOT. Fortunately, he left on very amicable terms. That was a condition of him coming over. Wouldn't want to ruin coming back to the funding partnerships. Wouldn't want to disrupt that partnership. At TDOT, he was director of their Civil Rights Division. So in that role, he oversaw Title VI, Equal Employment Opportunity, Affirmative Action, Environmental Justice, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. Prior to going to TDOT, he had extensive private sector experience in HR, safety, and risk management. And I have talked to a few of the folks at TDOT and senior leadership who think very highly of him. They're sad to lose him, but glad he's sort of staying in the family. He's coming on the end of the month, and concurrent with that, probably good timing since Nick did his report, we're also going to be elevating Nick to Chief Safety Officer and Renuka to Chief Communications Officer. So new and expanded roles for everybody. Because in Rita's absence, I can't keep doing all this work. That's a lot of work. Oh, thanks, Walter. Speaking of partnerships and planning, our staff, particularly in Trey's areas, continue to meet with Metro Planning and NDOT on really on a couple of projects, but also representatives from Oracle trying to design transit into the start of the East Bank project, which really will start with the beginning of construction on Oracle's campus next year. So that's going along very well. We think we'll get a really positive project out of that. And it's been a very good working relationship with NDOT on that in particular. And we're also back and forth on some of the Midtown developments on West End Avenue with some of the major development that's going on out there. So last month I brought you really good news about who the winners were in our local rodeo. And this month I have more good news. A lot more competition this year. Last year there weren't that many systems competing, so we pretty well cleaned up. This year, pretty much everybody was back in the mix, so everybody was back in competition. We still did extremely well, so very proud of our operations team in particular. I'd like to report on the bus maintenance side, one of our technicians, Pedro Ochoa, took first place in bus maintenance statewide. Troy Willis took second place in bus maintenance statewide, so that was really awesome. In the bus driving competition, we had Mark Johnson place first. And in the cutaway van competition, our access type vehicles, we had Scott Wallace place second. And in addition to that outstanding performance by our operators and our technicians, many of you know our safety manager, Earl Rhodes, who works with Nick, does a lot of our detailed day-to-day stuff. He was named by TIPTA as the Urban Support Employee of the Year statewide. So very well-earned honor for Earl. He does all the work while Nick is writing apps, I guess, you know. So, by the way, I think one of the reasons TIPTA named him was, I'm not sure if Earl ever does retire, which cannot be allowed to happen. In fact, I'd like to introduce a resolution to that effect. Not only will our rodeo suffer, but I'm not sure what the state's going to do, because he really is the glue that holds that event together. Just to update you on a couple of things going on the RTA side of the equation, we anticipate awarding, I've mentioned it in prior months, we're pursuing a STAR future visioning study on how we might reallocate or redeploy how the STAR operates to help the effectiveness of that particular asset. And we anticipate awarding that contract in November with the RTA Board. At the RTA Board meeting last week, they awarded a period of exclusive negotiation with a joint development venture of HG Hill and Southeast Venture to look at a joint development project at Donaldson Station. So I think that's going to be a really exciting opportunity. That particular development team has control of quite a bit of property immediately adjacent to the station, so it has the potential of becoming a pretty significant mixed-use development. For those of you who live maybe on the east end of town and you're football fans, the Titans Express is rolling strong. The Star runs to every Titans home game. And we sold out the first two. So my suggestion, anybody who might be watching on the cable, get your tickets early for the next game because they're definitely popular. And as long as they keep winning, we keep carrying a whole bunch of people. But other than that, unless there are any questions, Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions for Steve? I don't have a long report, but first of all, thank you all for reviewing the letter to planning and being able to send that, and most importantly, to talk about how we all work together from the beginning, and not just on East Bank, but on all of our projects. So I thought that was a really critical part that we all sort of supported. So thank you all for doing that. A welcome to Vince Malone when he gets here at the end of the month, and just a real hearty congratulations to Nick and Renuka. They have both been working so extremely hard, and continuing to grow and enhance we go. So congratulations, and we just look forward to your continuing efforts and our continuing support for your efforts. So thank you both, and congrats. Have some fun. I had an opportunity last week, I think it was, to go visit Transit Alliance Citizens Leadership Academy and give some remarks. And I was last, so since I was last, everyone took everything I was going to say that was of a technical nature. But the thing that was so great about it was Jessica's leadership, first of all. I'm just really proud of her, and I'm proud of her efforts and how she's expanding the conversation of transit regionally, and also how she's teaching people about transit. And so first of all, I just want to congratulate you, Jessica. Awesome. And to have started, with Transit Alliance on their board and sort of watch it grow and you grow with it is just sort of a great thing. So congrats to you. But what was heartening about it too was to hear so many different people talk about transit in so many different sectors of our community, from banks to community leaders to others. So we're out here and we have support, and we have so many people in our community that want to see transit grow. So when we think about the reports we heard today, and we think about what you all are doing, there are people in our community that really want transit. And so we have cheerleaders, and I'm grateful for that. And cheerleaders that have knowledge and understand what it takes to make transit grow in this region. So, Jessica, thank you for inviting me. And again, we got friends, you all. That's an exciting thing, I think. And we have a community that is supporting us, and that will allow all of our aspirations to continue to grow and be supported. Just want to remind everybody too, next month is Thanksgiving month. Very important. Thanksgiving this year is my birthday too. So because of that, we are going to have our, don't forget we have our board meeting on the third Thursday instead of the fourth Thursday. Just a reminder. I know Monica liked that I did that. And I also want to say we did, and I have to go back to public comment section. I should have mentioned it there. I did have a public comment via email from Darius Knight, and we will include that in our minutes. And also, I sent everybody a copy if you did not already receive it. So I'm sorry I failed to mention that earlier. And I think that really concludes my comments for today. But thank you, everybody, for being here. 4:01. Look at me, 4:01. Which it depends if it's that clock we got out at 4. So that one's 4:01. And if we don't look at our iPhones, not our not our Androids, it was 4:02. But I'm gonna go with the 4 o'clock and go with that one. So if there's nothing further, I will take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Tyler, good to see you today.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.